Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Guardians of Liberty podcast. Doing things a little bit different tonight. My co-host, Zach Taylor, is unfortunately feeling a bit under the weather today, so he won't be joining us. I'm on my own today. We'll see how this goes.
Roads to Liberty presents the Guardians of Liberty with your hosts, Nathan Barada and Zach Taylor.
So first thing I wanted to talk about today was the Republican Party's new spending bill that just got passed. And Rand Paul went on a tangent against the Republican Party, calling out their hypocrisy, calling out how they basically lie to the American people on a regular basis in order to trick people into thinking that they are the party of fiscal responsibility. Now, I think at one point he said that when Democrats are in power, the Republicans are the party of fiscal responsibility. And when Republicans are in power, then there is no fiscally responsible party. And I can't agree more with that assessment. A lot of people ask me why I choose to be a member of the Libertarian Party and not a member of the Republican Party. And they cite that the Republicans have a better chance of winning, that they have a larger movement, that they're just bigger and better organized. And yes, I'll grant them all that, but it's this sort of thing that really annoys me about the Republicans, that they've never, this is the perfect opportunity for Republicans to cash in on their promise of reining in government spending. So let's go, but they failed to do that. Consistently, the Republican Party fails to be a party that truly values fiscal responsibility. So this new bill will add $300 billion to the deficit. And the reason for that is simple. The Republican Party wanted more money to be spent on defense. From BBC, this bill contains $165 billion in additional defense spending and $131 billion in domestic spending, including funding for healthcare, infrastructure, and tackling the U.S. opioid crisis, reports Reuters news agency. So basically, this was the Republican Party wanted to fund the military. They wanted more spending to go towards defense. But the only way that they could get that passed is if they gave the Democrats something that they wanted. And the Democrats, of course, want more domestic spending. So this is the Achilles heel of the Republican Party. They cannot claim to be a party of fiscal responsibility and also want to be the party that sets no limit whatsoever on defense spending. Look, the United States military has more money than the next 10 countries combined. It's probably more than, I know it's more than the next 10 countries. And most of the countries on that list are allies of the United States. The United Kingdom, France, Saudi Arabia, Germany, Israel, countries like these that are not in opposition to American interests. Now, if you put together all the enemies that the United States have, China, North Korea, Iran, let's throw in Russia in there just for good measure. You throw in all these countries, they don't come close to the level of spending on their military that the United States does. The reason the United States needs so much more is because of the interventionist foreign policy that we have. You know, we can very easily cut back on defense spending, but the problem with that is if we cut back on defense spending, then we'll have to cut back on the missions that we ask the military to perform. We won't be able to maintain hundreds and hundreds of military bases all around the world. We won't be able to support regime change in places like Libya, Iraq, and now Syria. We won't be able to build more and more aircraft carriers that the Navy doesn't need or tanks that the Army does not want. These things are not going to be possible with the defense spending. But the thing is, we don't need all this. Now, there is no reason for the United States to maintain the level of military presence around the world that we have right now. We should not be in the role of the world's policeman. It simply is not in the United States' best effort, and this new budget deal simply proves that. The biggest threat to this nation as a whole is the debt. That is the one thing that will, at some point in time, bring this country to its knees. There is going to come a time when the interest rates are not going to be artificially held down at 1% anymore. You know, as much as the Federal Reserve may try, there's going to come a point in time where those interest rates are necessarily going to have to go up. How is the government going to pay its debts then? At 1%, that's a steal. They can pay that off easily. But if the interest rate starts going higher and higher, and the United States keeps borrowing at the rate it presently is, and there's no indication that it won't, how's it going to pay that? How's it going to pay the interest on that debt? All right, right now, we fund our government through borrowing. That's how we fund the government. We fund it through borrowing. If we can no longer pay interests on the debt that we owe, who in their right mind is going to lend to us? I'm surprised that anybody's lending us any money right now. Of course, the answer to that is the lender of last resort, the Federal Reserve. When China will no longer lend us any money, when taxpayers will no longer buy American bonds, the only people that will lend money to the U.S. government is the Federal Reserve. And that's one of the reasons the Federal Reserve was created in the first place, in order to finance the government in its endless spiral of spending. But the problem with that is the inflation that comes along with it. Right? At some point in time, if you just keep borrowing money from the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve keeps printing more and more money or just creating money out of thin air to finance government spending, if that keeps happening, eventually we're going to see inflation start to creep in. Right? Prices are going to go higher and higher and higher. The only way to avoid that, if we keep spending the way we are, is of course to raise taxes. We just had a massive tax decrease. That's a wonderful thing. That's awesome. I like tax decreases. I like it when taxing goes down, because taxation is theft. I should be allowed to keep as much money as I possibly can. The less money that the government takes from me, the better. But if taxation is the only way to fund these billions and billions and billions of dollars in deficits that we're running, then that's what's going to happen. It's either that or inflation. And inflation is just another form of taxation in and of itself. So what the Republican Party has done in the name of national defense is putting our country in far more danger than it ever was with the sequester. Right? The sequester was just a decrease in the rise of spending on the military. It wasn't an actual cut in military spending. They just slowed the rate of increase. That's all they did. You know, there was no cut. Right? This is the biggest myth that people like to spread around, that there was some kind of budget cut. That's a lie. There was no budget cut. So really, if the Republican Party is so concerned about defense spending, they don't need to raise spending in order to keep the military functioning. They just need to lessen the amount of missions that we do. You know, if we close a lot of these overseas bases, if we come home from Afghanistan, if we take our troops out of Iraq and out of Syria, and we do have troops in Syria, if we end our military involvement in places like Somalia and Sudan and Libya, if we ask our military to do less, then they can afford to take a pay cut. All right? We do not have to spend as much money on our military if we don't ask our military to do so much. So the Republican Party is just a bunch of hypocrites. Absolutely. I mean, this is why I can't be a Republican. If the Libertarian Party had a president, was in charge of the Senate and in charge of Congress, and they still raise spending by $300 billion, I would leave the Libertarian Party too. All right, I'm not going to be on team spending increase. I don't want to be on the side of the people who are going to destroy this country via debt. And that's what the Republicans are doing. Now, they will come back to you in 2020, all right? They'll come back to you and say, you need to vote for us. We are the party of fiscal responsibility. We are the party that cares about how our money is spent. This is the lie that they have told you year after year after year. And they will continue to tell you this lie. There is no, if you're a fiscal conservative Republican, there is no reason to vote for the Republican Party. If you're fiscally conservative, the Republicans have sold you out. With the exception of Rand Paul and maybe a few others, exception to people like Thomas Macy or Justin Amash, real fiscal hawks, the Republican Party as a whole is not a party that stands for fiscal responsibility. All right? This was a 700-page bill that was thrown on the floor. No amendments were allowed. No debate was allowed. It was thrown on the Senate floor the day of the government was scheduled to shut down. Now, this was done intentionally. You cannot tell me that this was an accident. Of course it was done intentionally. It was done intentionally because Senate leadership knew that people who were desperate to avoid a shutdown for whatever reason, and I'm fine with the shutdown, shut it all down as far as I'm concerned, but they knew that their colleagues who were desperate to avoid a shutdown would vote for this bill without thinking about it. You think any of these people read this 700-page bill? Do you think there's a single senator or congressman who actually took the time to read this? They didn't have the time. It would be impossible to do so. But they shoved it down their throats. They wanted to get this bill passed by any means necessary, and they had to sneak it in at the last minute and scare people into voting for it, then that's what they were going to do. And Senator Rand Paul was absolutely correct in opposing it. So bravo, Senator Paul, for your opposition to this Republican bill. All right, so the Republican Party is not a party of fiscal responsibility anymore. That's just the way it is. If you want a party of fiscal responsibility, the only people out there are the libertarians. We are the only ones who are principally against this sort of spending, because we understand that spending is a tax. All right? If you spend money, you're going to have to tax it one way or the other. And it doesn't matter if you finance the new debt with taxes today or you defer it in some other way, either through debt or inflation. At some point in time, if you have any intention of paying that money back, it needs to come out of the wealth of the American people. Either they're going to tax future generations to pay for it, and that's what we call borrowing. It's just a tax on your children, or they're going to inflate it. All right, they're going to pay for it via inflation. That's a tax on the poorest among us. That's just going to eat away. It's going to eat away at the savings of every individual in this country. And the people that can afford that least, the poor, are going to be hit the hardest. All right, that's all I got to say about the Republican spending bill. It's just absolutely infuriating. All right, moving on. We had a bit of controversy this week at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. This week, 300 students and faculty, including basketball coach Tim Miles, protested in front of the UNL bookstore in order to demand that the university expel white nationalist student Daniel Cleave. Now, this controversy was sparked when Nebraska Antifa doxed Daniel Cleave. Now, they found a YouTube live stream and circulated it around the UNL campus of Daniel Cleave calling himself the most active white nationalist in Nebraska. And let me just read the quote from him. He said, "Trust me, I want to be violent. Trust me, really violent. But now is not the time, so we need to build ourselves up. We need to be disciplined so that when the time comes, we can, do what needs to be done, basically. And more evidence brought up against him there was a picture of him in Charlottesville. Now, the picture shows him in the background with it looks like either a flashlight or umbrella. It's kind of hard to tell from the picture. He's got it kind of raised like this, all right? And in the foreground, there is what appears to be a counter-protester being kicked by two other white nationalists, kind of doubled over, being kicked. All right, now this is the evidence that students in UNL were bringing to the university in order to have them, expel this student. All right, there's the, all right, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln won't expel this student, however. The Chancellor Ronnie Green said Thursday, quote, "The student's viewpoint, however hateful and intolerant it is also protected by the First Amendment. That is the law, even if we disagree." Now, I have to say that, first of all, libertarians unanimously oppose white nationalism. We oppose collectivist ideals altogether, no matter what form they come in, whether those collectivist ideals come in the form of communism or fascism. We understand that these ideologies grow from the same root, right? They are both diverging branches on the same tree, and the root of that tree is called collectivism. See, whether it be communism, fascism, all these ideologies that we oppose, that we fight, that we want nothing to do with, they're all collectivist ideologies. And libertarianism at its heart is a philosophy of individualism. We believe that the individual is sovereign and that the individual has natural and inalienable rights. Those rights being life, liberty, and property. It doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter what sex you are. It doesn't matter what country you're from. Everybody has these rights. And to set up a country on the basis of race, especially a country like the United States, which is as diverse as any other country in the world, there's no basis whatsoever in developing an ethno-state. It would be impossible anyway, and it'd be impossible and undesirable. It's an inherently collectivist notion which we should reject. Now, that being said, the question here in this particular instance is not whether or not white ethno-nationalism is an okay ideology. It's not. We've established that. It's no more okay than socialism or communism, which are equally abhorrent ideologies. The question here is whether or not this student should be kicked off of campus. And it seems to me that this was more of a witch hunt than anything else. Yes, the guy's words are reprehensible. His ideology is reprehensible. He's a scumbag. We can acknowledge that. But people should not. But this is a matter of free speech on campus. All right, having a radical and abhorrent ideology shouldn't be grounds for expulsion. All right, this is a public university. It's paid for by tax dollars, including the tax dollars of this individual's families, who's from Nebraska. All right, they help pay for the upkeep of this university. There's no reason whatsoever that he should be expelled from the university simply for having a bad ideology. Thoughts are not crimes. Words are not violence. Remember, this is one guy. This is not the leader of some large white nationalist organization that exists on UNL. There is no such organization. It's just this one guy. He's not made any specific threats against any specific person. He's never committed an act of violence on UNL, or else I'm sure that would have come up in the course of these protests. All right, he has not violated the code of conduct as I understand it. All right, I agree with the university. He should not be expelled as a matter of freedom of speech. Now, it's kind of ironic to me that it's mainly leftist progressives who have been committing outright violence on college campuses for months now. For months, maybe not here specifically at UNL, but I don't remember anyone calling for students at, say, UC Berkeley to be kicked off for teaching the ideology of communism or for their outright violent acts against speakers such as Ben Shapiro or Milo Yiannopoulos. All right, I very much doubt that if a UNL student got on a live stream and called for a communist revolution, that it would elicit the kind of outrage that we see now against this one white nationalist student. And make no mistake, communism itself is an inherently violent ideology. Communists believe in a revolution of the proletariat against bourgeois and against capitalism. That's what they think is ultimately going to happen when communism comes into power. And communism has killed far more people than fascism ever did. For some reason, it gets a pass. Professors are allowed to openly advocate for the Marxist ideologies. Students are openly allowed to preach this vile ideology all they want. And they should be. This is a college. College is supposed to be the place where you go to be exposed to differing opinions and ideologies. It's not a safe space. If you're going to college for the safe space, you're going for the wrong reason. You're supposed to be exposed to things that make you uncomfortable, to ways of thinking that you may not have encountered before. That's the whole point. It's a space to learn. It's an intellectual environment. At least that's what it's supposed to be. And yes, white nationalists have as much a right to enter the free marketplace ideas as you do and as I do. It is incumbent upon us to engage with these vile and wicked ideologies and to debunk them in the open marketplace of ideas. Sunlight is the best disinfectant we have. Let these people talk. Let them share their ideas. Let them spread their vile hatred all they want, so long as they do not actually get violent. And let us respond to it. Let us reply. Let us not cower in silence. Let us stand tall and be brave and courageous in the face of these ideologies, because we have the truth on our side. There is no reason whatsoever why people with truth on their side should cower in a corner and fear the words of vile men. We should be confident in our ideas. The only reason you would ever wish to silence the words of others is if you are not confident in your own. So as vile as these white nationalists are, as hateful as they are, as much as we may be repulsed by their words, their ideas, by the very principles that they espouse, it is not incumbent on us to silence them by force. Let them talk. Let them make fools of themselves. That is what I want. And let us engage. Let us have the courage to engage them in an open marketplace of ideas. Let the best ideas win. Because you know what? They don't have the best ideas. Fascism is a bloody failure. It takes a simple look at history to see that. Same with communism. These are bloody and evil ideologies that result in failure 100% of the time. Liberty succeeds. Capitalism succeeds. What we preach is the truth. The only way to prove that is in the marketplace of ideas. All right. That's all I got to say about that specific issue. Now, moving on. General Mattis admits no evidence against Assad for gas attack. Now, we all remember last year when President Assad of Syria was accused of launching a chemical weapons attack against his own people. There was a very, very large push for war against Syria to topple the Assad regime as a result of this. I think we all remember this. Ron Paul, I remember, got on his podcast and expressed doubts as to whether or not this was actually Assad. And he just got reamed for it. People attacked him left and right. How dare he? How dare he question the validity of this? Of course it was Assad. Who else could it be? Well, let me read something from General Mattis. He says, and I quote, "We have other reports from the battlefield from people who claim it's been used," Mattis told reporters at the Pentagon. "We do not have evidence of it. We're looking for evidence, since clearly we're dealing with the Assad regime that has used denial and deceit to hide their outlaw actions," he said. So they're looking for evidence, which is fine. Look all you want. But he says straight up, we do not have evidence of this. That is a huge admittance right there. To admit that the U.S. government has no evidence that Assad himself was the one responsible for that chemical weapons attack. We almost went to war last year. Do we all remember this? Donald Trump launched an airstrike against a Syrian airfield. That was an act of war. Now, fortunately, Syria realized that it was not in their best interest to respond. Russia knew it was not in their best interest to respond, though they did warn the U.S. government not to take any further action. Fortunately, we didn't. That's a situation that could have very easily led to U.S. involvement in Syria, led to an invasion, or at the very least, an involvement very much like what we saw in Libya, where we launched airstrikes against Assad and then helped the rebels overtake the country. Now, we all know the devastating results that had for Libya. All right, we all know the devastating results that regime change in Iraq brought about. These interventions don't work. They never have. They never will. But I remember specifically that was the one time the media and political elite of both parties rallied behind Donald Trump and called for him to launch a war against Syria. All on no evidence whatsoever, according to General Mattis. No evidence supporting the idea that President Assad was the one to launch those chemical weapons. I'm going to quote from you from the article. It says, "Syria's experienced chemical weapons experts and investigators such as Hans Blix, Scott Ryder, Gareth Porter, and Theodore Postal have all cast doubt on official American narratives regarding President Assad employing sarin. These analyses have all focused on the technical aspects of the two attacks and found them not to be consistent with the new use of nation-style quality sarin munitions. In 2013, I think it's pronounced Groda event, for example, employed homemade rockets of the type favored by insurgents. The White House Memorandum of Khan Shikun, I think that's how you say it, seemed to rely heavily on testimony from the Syrian White Helmets, who were filmed at the scene having contact with supposed sarin-tainted casualties and not suffered any ill effects. Likewise, these same actors were filmed wearing chemical weapons training suits around the supposed point of impact in Khan Shikun, something which makes their testimony and samples highly suspect. A training suit offers no protection at all, and these people would all be dead if they had come in contact with real military-grade sarin. Chemical weapons are abhorrent and illegal, and no one knows this more than Carla Del Ponte. She, however, was unable to fulfill her UN Joint Investigative Mechanism mandate in Syria and withdrew in protest over the United States' refusal to fully investigate allegations of chemical weapons use by rebels, allied with the American effort to oust President Assad. including the use of sarin by anti-Assad rebels. The fact that UN investigators were in Syria when the chemical weapons event in Khan Shaykhun occurred on April 2017 makes it highly dubious that Assad would have given the order to use sarin at the time. Common sense suggests that Assad would have chosen any other time than to use banned weapons that he had agreed to destroy and never employ. This makes perfect sense. This is what I was saying at the time, that it made no sense whatsoever for President Assad, who was winning the war against the rebels and ISIS in Syria, to employ sarin gas, to employ a weapon that would almost guarantee to bring the ire of Western nations against him. Now, never mind the fact that Russia is allied with Assad, he had no reason to use this gas. And the target he used it on was hardly a legitimate military target at all. If he wanted to deal a major blow to rebels, he didn't choose an opportune target. He didn't choose an opportune target at all. So General Mattis is admitting that there's no evidence whatsoever that President Assad was the one who definitively used these weapons. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't do it. He very well could have. But the evidence doesn't support that conclusion, and we almost went to war over it. And this only serves as further proof that the political elite in this country, the warmongers in this country, want war with Syria and will use any justification they can get their hands on to make that a reality. They want war. You know, Republicans, Democrats alike. And they have the media in their pocket. The media is just going to go along with whatever they say. They want this war too. This is why we cannot trust government officials. This is why we shouldn't just take intelligence agencies' words on things. And we shouldn't just listen to the media either. When they want a war, they have no problem fabricating evidence and making up truths, quote unquote, in order to justify the narrative that we need to go to war. That's just a fact. They did it in Iraq, and they were doing it in Syria. Fortunately, the American people didn't fall for it. I mean, that was the second major push towards war in Syria that we've had, the previous one coming under President Barack Obama. And the American people said, no, we don't want it. And you know what? It didn't happen. So let's hope that truth wins out and we can stay out of war in Syria. All right, one more topic I want to talk about really quick. Who's going to the movies this weekend? Black Panther is coming out, and a lot of people are very excited for it, myself included. It looks like a very good film. But the thing I want to talk about is this almost cult-like adherence to the false god of diversity, as I like to call it, that progressives have. Now, going through some of the reviews of Black Panther, there's a common theme that I keep seeing. And it's not praise of the movie's artistic merits, which, to be fair, I hear are very good. I hear the movie artistically is a very good movie. But that's not the first thing that I see when I look at some of these reviews. All right, I'm going to read you a few quotes from some reviews I pulled off of Rotten Tomatoes. Quote, a certain socially conscious apprehension can come with popular art that is expected to be groundbreaking or revolutionary. Black Panther arrives freighted with the highest of expectations. Here's the Marvel movie even non-Marvel fans are prepared to root for. The rare black superhero film, one boasting not only an almost all-black cast, but helmed by a black director as well. The stakes are higher here than just the fate of Marvel Universe. What if it sucks? What if it flops? What would that mean for the future diversity studio tent poles? That's from Christine Kim from The Village Voice. All right, next quote. This new Marvel franchise, the first with a predominantly black cast, succeeds not only for the quality of its design and diversity of its casting, but also for its strength of purpose. Black Panther isn't yet another blockbuster where mutant heroes fight a supernatural villain bent on blowing up the world or galaxy for kicks. The main argument here concerns ideology, how people define duty and responsibility, both within and without national borders. That's from Peter Howell of The Star. And this one's from Stephen Whitey from the New York Daily News. Quote, Black Panther matters. In an era of white guy superheroes, the movie's latest marvel gives us an action icon out of Africa and a role model for young African-American fans. Wonder Woman empowered female nerds. Black Panther provides the same for geeks of color, a hero who looks like them. Now, excuse me for being a little annoyed by this, but first of all, Black Panther is not a movie with a diverse cast. Can we get that out of the way? An all-black cast is no more diverse by the progressive definition than an all-white cast. Now, having everybody of one color in a film is not a racially diverse cast. That's normally the progressive point of view when you're looking at a movie that has a mostly white cast. For instance, last year they were complaining about Dunkirk, which is a fantastic film, but has an almost entirely white cast. Instead, all the main characters are white, and they're all male. There's a good reason for that. It's set in France with about British troops, almost all of whom would be white. That's just a fact of the matter. Forcing diversity makes no sense in that case. In the case of Black Panther, it makes sense, perfect sense to have an all-black cast. It's a movie set in Africa, after all. Wakanda is a fictional African nation. Having an entirely black cast makes perfect sense. But it's not diverse. Let's stop pretending that it is. At least not in a racial sense. All right? Now, I haven't seen Black Panther. I cannot comment on its artistic merit. Again, I hear it's very good. But there is no reason to focus on this diversity nonsense as if it's something that, honest to God, matters. Now, a lot of people give Marvel a lot of heat for not being quote-unquote diverse. This is nonsense. All right? Marvel's franchise is has some of the most diverse characters you will ever see. But you have to use the proper definition of diverse. The kind of diversity that actually makes art better. Having a bunch of shades of color does not necessarily make a film better. And it doesn't necessarily make for a diverse cast. Now, what do I mean by when I say that Marvel has is one of the most diverse franchises out there? Because, yeah, they're all mostly white dudes. That's the fact of the matter is. But even then, they're incredibly diverse. All right, so here's what I mean by that. It's diversity of character that makes a good story, not diversity of skin color. All right, different history, experiences, and personalities are what make for a diverse cast. Now, having people of diverse backgrounds can contribute to this. But even a cast of all white or all black characters can be diverse. This is because individuals differ from each other within racial categories. All right, I'm Puerto Rican, but I'm very different from a Puerto Rican who was born and raised in Puerto Rico. See, I was born to a military family. I was born in the United Kingdom, but was raised my whole life in the United States. I don't speak Spanish. I never lived in Puerto Rico. I am very distant from Puerto Rican culture. So just the very fact that I share an ethnicity with a Puerto Rican who's born and raised on the island does not mean that I actually have a lot in common with them. You know what I'm saying? I do not have a lot in common with people who are born and raised in a predominantly Spanish-speaking island. That's just a fact of life. No, so if we were both, say we were both characters in a film, yeah, sure, we're both Puerto Ricans, so racially that's not very diverse, but our different histories and experiences and our different personalities mean that we're going to be incredibly different from one another. And that's ultimately what makes for good art, diversity of characters. So having a cast that's made up entirely of white people or black people or men or women can still be incredibly diverse. Right? But the thing that really bothers me about this is when progressives say diverse, they don't really mean that. All right, otherwise they wouldn't be calling Black Panther a diverse cast, because objectively speaking, it's not. They just mean non-white. In the eyes of progressives, diversity means everything that isn't white, straight, male, and cisgendered, I guess is the term they use for it. It's just not their definition of diversity does not make art better. Let's look at some of the Avengers. Captain America is incredibly different from Iron Man. And Iron Man is incredibly different from the Hulk, who's also incredibly different from Thor. Now, those are all straight white men. All of them. And by the progressive standard of diversity, that makes for an incredibly undiverse cast. But just think about how different those characters are from one another. Think about how their personalities cause them to butt heads and causes conflict that they need to overcome and ultimately resolve. Now, if they were all of different colors, but all had the same personality, a progressive might call that diverse. And in racial terms, it would be diverse. But it doesn't make for a better story. It's diversity of personalities, diversity of character that really makes a story better. So if you're going to put a hyper focus on race, on gender, on sexuality, on these things that do absolutely nothing for the overall quality of a film, but if these are the things you harp on and make a big deal out of, the only thing you're ultimately going to do is bring down the quality of your art. All right, this is exactly what happened to the comic book industry, where people are hyper-focused on diversity of looks and forget that it's diversity of character that really makes for good stories. I do not want to see social justice thinking infect more art forms and ruin them. That is the ultimate result of social justice thinking. All right, when it infects comic books, movies, we talked to J.J. Frederick a few weeks back about how it's infecting a lot of more male-dominated nerd culture type things like heavy metal, Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40K. It gets its stinking claws onto these properties and these art forms and forces people not to look at diversity of character, diversity of setting, and having good stories, but forces people to look at diversity of looks, of outward appearances, of things that ultimately shouldn't matter all that much. It ruins good art. It makes for bad movies. And I really hope that we don't see it become a focal point of films going forward. All right, that's it for me. Solo episode today. Hope to have Zach back next week, where he can come back and talk about the issues of the day some more. All right, that's it for me, everybody. From the Roads to Liberty, thank you for listening. For those of you who subscribe to our YouTube channel, thank you for watching. You all have a good week. Goodbye, Nebraska.